ਚੱਕਦੇ ਟੀਵੀ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਵਿਕਰਮ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਅਲਬਰਟਾ ਦੀ ਰਾਜਨੀਤੀ ਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਉੱਗੀ ਤੇ ਪ੍ਰਸਿੱਧ ਸ਼ਖਸੀਅਤ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਾਉਣ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਹੀ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਲਬਰਟਾ ਦੀ ਰਾਜਨੀਤੀ ਦੇ ਗਲਿਆਰਿਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਹੀ ਪਛਾਣ ਬਣਾ ਲਈ ਹੈ। ਮੇਰੀ ਮੁਰਾਦ ਅਲਬਰਟਾ ਦੀ ਓਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਵਾਈਲਡਰੋਜ਼ ਦੀ ਲੀਡਰ ਡੈਨੀਅਲ ਸਮਿਥ ਤੋਂ ਹੈ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਮੇਰੇ ਸਾਥੀ ਦਵਿੰਦਰ ਤੂਰ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ। ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਿਸ ਸਮਿਥ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਲਬਰਟਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਕਾਰਨ ਰਾਜਨੀਤੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਸਰਗਰਮੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਮੌਜੂਦਾ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੇ ਕਾਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਚਰਚਾ ਕੀਤੀ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਿਸ ਸਮਿਥ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਸੋਚ ਤੇ ਫਿਊਚਰ ਦੇ ਪਲਾਨ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ। ਆਓ ਅਸੀਂ ਡੈਨੀਅਲ ਸਮਿਥ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਈ ਇਸ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਦੀ ਵੀਡੀਓ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ।
ਪਿਆਰੇ ਦੋਸਤੋ, ਦਵਿੰਦਰ ਤੂਰ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਕਬੂਲ ਕਰਨੀ। ਵਾਅਦੇ ਮੁਤਾਬਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਡੈਨੀਅਲ ਸਮਿਥ, ਲੀਡਰ ਆਫ ਦ ਓਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਐਂਡ ਲੀਡਰ ਆਫ ਦ ਵਾਈਲਡਰੋਜ਼ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਟੂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਹਾਂ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪੋਲਿਟਿਕਸ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਸੋ ਫਸਟ ਆਫ ਆਲ, thank you very much, Danielle, for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So let's talk about politics. It was quite busy from last few months.
It has been.
Yeah. Were you following the leadership race of PC party?
We were. We were kind of expecting it to have a lot more fireworks and be a lot more interesting than it turned out to be. Normally what happens in a leadership race is all of the candidates come forward with a bunch of different ideas about what they're going to implement when they become premier. I was surprised to see that this premier had very few ideas that he put forward, which is why I think it's unclear what the direction is going to be. Every time the PC party changes leader, they go in a wildly different direction. And it's very interesting that in their first 36 years in power, they only had 3 premiers. But in the last 7 years, we're now on our 4th premier. There's been it's been unbelievable how much change there has been in the leadership, how much change there's been in each of the ministries. And I think people are still trying to catch their breath, trying to understand what this new change is going to mean with this new leader.
When I think Mr. Prentice, who is the leader now, was campaigning, I think he hasn't come up with too many policies or who he knows or what he's going to do. You think you know him now?
I don't think Albertans do know him, and I certainly don't know what direction he's going to take the province in. What I do fear is that it's going to be more of the same, because we do see some of the same bad practices that have already crept in. He promised before the election he wouldn't appoint any of his campaign workers to government positions, and then after the campaign he's appointed a couple of people who are allies to him into senior government official positions. It's still the same people who ran Alison Redford's campaign who are running his campaign. When we look at the major policy difference between us and the governing party, it's on the issue of deficits and debt. He is still committed to running us into debt. We believe that we need to have genuine balanced budgets. And the only real policy that he stood out on was the issue of term limits for all MLAs. And while I certainly don't think that we should have career politicians who are there for 20 or 30 or 40 years, I do think that it was pretty clear that that was a policy that couldn't be implemented under our system of government, that it wouldn't have been legal, and he backed away from it virtually the moment he got elected. So that's, I think, what we've seen, is that there's policies put on the table, and then he walks away from them when he has time to implement them. There are still, I think, some serious issues about entitlement in the governing party. I think that we have yet to see whether or not there will be any meaningful changes on that front. There really is a need for some leadership from the top. We need to see a political leader who is not going to abuse his expense account, who's not going to be flying first class around the world, who's not going to be staying at the best hotels and eating at the fanciest restaurants. And I think that sets the tone for the entire government. What kind of premier this new one is going to be, I think that we still don't know.
So once he is elected, he's sending you very good messages. He's trying to agree whatever you ask for it.
I have to say the opposition has been united in a number of issues over the last 6 to 18 months on the issue of selling the government planes. on the issue that it was a dumb idea to try to change the slogan on the license plates, on the need to keep Michener Centre open to take care of our most vulnerable and disabled Albertans. And I think that those were some pretty easy wins. I mean, whether you elected the Wildrose or the Liberals or the NDs, we all would have done the same thing as well. So in some ways, it's not surprising that with the huge public outcry and the consensus that those were bad ideas, that he had to change them. But this is, I think, the frustrating thing Albertans are seeing, especially over the last 7 years, is you've got a premier who comes in and makes very unpopular decisions in the first part of their mandate, and then they have to be completely undone in the second part of the mandate. In the case of Alison Redford, she made a lot of unpopular decisions, and now they're being some of them are being undone by the current premier. I guess what I would like to see out of a leader is that for them to stop making dumb decisions in the first place. And we haven't, unfortunately, seen any evidence yet that we know what this new premier is going to do. So we have to reserve judgment until we start seeing some of the legislative agenda. But he has to get elected first. And I have to say, not every leader who gets elected outside through a party process gets elected in a by-election. Christy Clark didn't win her seat and had to run somewhere else. Don Getty lost his seat and had to run somewhere else. In Saskatchewan, Grant Devine, I think, lost by-election 3 times and had to run somewhere else. So we're going to give him a good run for his money.
So you mean if we have a by-election, if he loses, then we'll have another by-election?
That's been the only other place that I'd heard about was in Saskatchewan, where it took a couple of tries before the leader of a party was able to get himself a seat. So we'll see. I'm not sure what would happen with this premier. I mean, he has chosen 2 very safe seats, historically safe seats, to run his 2 unelected cabinet ministers. Again, another bad signal. I think that there are a lot of people who are very unhappy and frustrated with the fact that you've got 2 individuals who don't have an elected mandate responsible for over 50% of our budget spending. But we have yet to see where Mr. Prentice is going to run.
Well, he was sitting on the same chair you're sitting before a few weeks ago.
Yes.
I asked him very straightforward question about by-election.
Yes.
He said if he gets elected as a leader, he will call the by-election right away.
Yes.
So it's been almost 3 weeks now.
Yes.
So from September 6th, we're pretty much 18th day.
Yes.
He's making announcements, pretty much catching up the news every day. But we need to know when the by-election will be there. We're waiting for 3 announcements. Actually, 3 seats will be open for sure.
Yes.
2 unelected ministers and himself. Right. So you think when he will call the election?
Well, we understand that there was a 7-day period for choosing the through the nomination process for the PC party, and it sounds to me like Mr. Dirks has won the nomination in Elbow. I would only assume that Mr. Mandel has won the nomination in Edmonton, Whitemuds, but we still are waiting to see what Mr. Prentice does. We're still expecting that the election is going to be held very soon. The legislature won't come back into sitting until November the 17th. So he does have a couple more weeks of wiggle room to be able to call the by-election campaign, but we're just waiting to see. We're going to be ready wherever it is he decides to call it, because we've got candidates on standby willing to step up to be able to carry the Wildrose banner into that election.
Okay, let's talk about a little bit about policies now. So I think once he decided he's going to run, he sent you a very good message that he's going to merge with you guys, or he wants you to merge, or he want to merge. He denied it. Of course, I think you said that there was a message. But now what we're looking for the messages from him, are the threatening message he's sending or sending a friendly message to you?
I think that the tradition of the PCs have tried to be the party for everybody. So that's why they have such, I think, such wild extremes in some of the policies that they put forward, because in some cases they have very liberal or progressive members, and in some cases they have very conservative members, but they don't have a consistent type of approach. That I think is going to be something that remains to be seen under this premier. We think that at some point they've got to develop a consistency in their approach. One of the things that I think the PCs have failed at is providing honest and ethical and capable government. And I think that that's what people are looking forward in judging this new premier. I personally think that somebody who has spent so much time outside of the province, he's spent most of the last 5 years outside of the province, not following provincial issues. I think he has a very steep learning curve to even begin to understand the issues before he can correct them. I think we're already beginning to see that in the area of healthcare. The fact that we have a health minister who really doesn't know very much about healthcare. You could tell from from the announcement that was made on rural Alberta and the services. It's pretty obvious to everyone who's been watching this for some time what the solutions are to be able to get better care in rural Alberta, to get seniors into more appropriate facilities so that they aren't blocking beds in hospitals. And we've got a health minister who's starting at square one. We have an education minister as well. When Premier was running, he talked about how he didn't want to have temporary schools. And yet one of his first actions is to develop and announce temporary schools. So this is, I think, the frustrating thing that Albertans have about the way the PCs conduct themselves, is that they say one thing to get elected, and then they'll say something else when it comes down to actually making decisions. There's a credibility problem that we have. I think people want to see politicians who are going to tell them clearly what they're going to do, seek and get a mandate for that agenda, and then implement it and do so honestly. And unfortunately, we haven't had good government from the PCs in that regard for some time.
So he brought Mr. Mandel as a health minister.
Yes.
All we know, he's a big spender. At his role as a mayor,
yes,
he was looking for a lot of money for building arenas and this.
Yes.
Mr. Prentice doesn't agree with those things. I asked him about that. Well, we don't have a problem about spending in healthcare. So by bringing Mr. Mandel, what kind of problem he's going to fix? You think he's going to spend more money?
I have to say, a couple of the things that have been raised with me since Mr. Mandel announced that he was going to be joining the PC caucus as a cabinet minister was looking at his record as mayor. I think when he became mayor, they had a couple $100 million in debt. Now they have over $2 billion worth of debt. There was the issue as well of a photo radar. They thought they could do it better as a government, so they ended up ending the private sector contract. And then the amount ballooned to $47 million in overcharges from what they thought it was going to be. So I think that there are some examples in Mr. Mandel's record of how he ran things when he was mayor that don't bode well for being at the helm of a ministry which is already spending more than any other ministry. It really is structural change and structural reform that's needed. I don't believe that we solve the problem in healthcare by throwing more money at it. What we've seen happen over the last number of years is the more money that went into healthcare, they continue to just build up layers of bureaucrats. And individuals who don't deliver an hour worth of frontline services are the ones who are getting paid the most money. And then you can't get rid of them because when you do, they've signed these sweetheart deals where you have to pay a massive amount of severance payments. Once again, that draws away from frontline service and care. So do I have any expectation that this new health minister is going to make a bit of difference? I really don't. I think that the problem is that the people who created this problem are not going to be the ones who are able to undo it. I think that requires a change of government so that we can have a fresh set of eyes come in and try some things differently.
So today he came and he wants to end the sense of entitlement.
Yes.
After appointing few people, he actually is going to bring a legislation against it. What do you think about it?
I think it seems to the public very hypocritical to, on the one hand, say, I'm not going to appoint the people who worked on my campaign, and then to appoint the people who worked on his campaign. To say we're going to end sole source contracts, and yet we know that Manmeet Bhullar, as one of his last acts at Service Alberta, ended up giving a sole source contract to the CIBC. And Mr. Prentice knew about it, to say that he's going to end entitlements, and then he plucks two of his friends up to manage the two biggest departments that we have in government. There's a credibility issue when you see that the same people who backed Alison Redford are the same people who backed Mr. Prentice. The same practices that got Alison Redford into trouble are some of the same practices we're already seeing creep in here. So I think that it's more than words. You can't just say you're going to act with integrity. You actually have to live up to your commitments. And so far we're seeing some bad signs that the same practices have crept in. We do fear that what we're going to see is just more of the same with this new premier. So
are you going to change in making any changes in your strategy, how to deal with Mr. Prentice compared to Mr. Redford?
We have always taken the approach that we are a policy-based party. We think people care about ideas. It's part of the reason why we post all of our member-passed policies on our website. Some of them have gotten us into trouble in the past, as you know, but we want people to know exactly what we stand for. So if you go onto our website, www.wildrose.ca, you'll be able to see all of our member-passed policy. We've also repackaged them and put out 6 caucus-passed policies, and we think that that's really the way that you win elections. We know that we have to do two things. We have to encourage people to come to the conclusion that we need to change government after 43 years. We need to give them the evidence about why they shouldn't vote for the PCs. But in convincing them of that, then we have to give them the positive option of why they should vote for us. So that part of the strategy stays the same. The difficulty again with Mr. Prentice is that it's difficult to know how to criticize what he's going to do until he tells us what he's going to do. And all we've seen in the last couple of weeks is him backpedaling on a few things he promised during the campaign and plucking the easy fruit of policies that all three opposition parties have been in alignment on. So I think he has to do a little bit more, and we're going to challenge him. It may have been enough to win the PC leadership to have blank platitudes and not make commitments and run a campaign that was free of ideas. But when you want to be premier and you want to win your by-election, you're going to get challenged, and not only by us, but by the other opposition parties. So hopefully some of that will be made more clear. But at the moment, I don't think that Mr. Prentice is taking very many risks. I don't think that he wants to be very clear about what position he wants to take on issues or what policies he wants to implement. I think that that's a strategy on his part to try to sail in to win the by-elections, and then we'll see what comes next. We think that's I'd rather not have another individual who has a hidden agenda. I'd rather see the agenda right up front. Let's know what it is you're going to do. Where are you going to take the province? And then we can have a debate about ideas, and that's what we're going to challenge Mr. Prentice to do.
So you think he's just picking up the low-hanging fruits or something?
He is. I mean, it was very clear that the issues that he chose to take action on were causing a huge problem for his government. But let's remember, those are only recent decisions. I mean, the decision on the license plates came out over the summer. The bills that they brought forward to strip away pension rights, those were just brought forward in the spring. The issue of the Michener Centre has been an issue for about a year and a half. I've been a leader for 5 years. Those are not the reasons why, even though we've battled on those issues, the main reasons why I became leader of this party and left the PCs is because they couldn't get their act together on finances, and they still can't. They couldn't get their act together on healthcare to deliver healthcare we want and need when we want and need it, and they still can't. They have a structure in the way they operate their party where nobody is allowed to stand up and defend the rights and interests of their constituents. It's part of the reason they make so many mistakes in the first place, is nobody's allowed to tell the leader or anyone else that they're doing something wrong. That's not the way we operate in our party. We have free votes on every issue. So the reasons why we're concerned about the direction of this government remain exactly the same as when I became the leader 5 years ago. We just haven't seen much progress, and frankly, I just don't see much changing under this leader.
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਦੋਸਤੋ, ਅਸੀਂ ਥੋੜੇ ਜਿਹੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੀ ਕਮਰਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਲਵਾਂਗੇ। ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਫੇਰ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ। ਹਾਂਜੀ ਦੋਸਤੋ, ਚੱਕਦੇ ਟੀਵੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੋਣ ਲਈ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ। ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਆਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਲੀਡਰ ਡੈਨੀਅਲ ਸਮਿਥ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਦਾ ਵੇਰਵਾ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਫਿਰ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ। Okay, Danielle, so we were talking about federal politics, the bond between federal government and the provincial government. You enjoyed the so far support from the federal government. Every MP was supporting you, but we have seen a shift. Even before Mr. Prentice came, we have seen some member parliaments, they were openly saying they're not going to support Wildrose. Was this the fact that Mr. Prentice came to PC party, or it was something else we don't know?
One of the things that I've always appreciated about my federal friends is that they did not want to get involved in the fight that was happening provincially. And I would say that most of the federal MPs did stay fairly neutral. I know that we have some fans and champions, and I know that the PCs have always enjoyed some fans and champions. But what happens is we come together when it's a federal election, and a lot of our volunteers will work on federal MPs' campaigns, and I suspect that that's going to stay the same. I would have to say that the relationship with the federal government would be good with us as well, even if there is a change of government, because we do have good ties with our federal counterparts. There are a few issues that we're dealing with the federal government that we're concerned about. One of them, of course, being the changes to the temporary foreign worker program and the need for us to develop an immigration approach in Alberta that works to meet the needs of our economy. I've already started conversations with Minister Kenney on that, and I'm hoping that we can make some progress on it. We know as well that the equalization formula is coming up for renegotiation in 2019. I've been very disappointed with the PC government that they've never taken a position on how they want that changed. Now we have a new premier in Quebec, Philippe Couillard, who said he wants to wean Quebec off equalization. So this is a very good opportunity for, I think, Alberta to work collaboratively with the federal government to get some changes. I've also proposed the need for a commercial corridor across the northern part of our country, from northern Ontario through Manitoba, Saskatchewan, linking Fort McMurray with Grand Prairie and going on to Port of Prince Rupert to build a new Trans-Canada highway, new Trans-Canada rail line, pipeline, transmission lines. Again, these kinds of things require the support of our federal government. And I've had an opportunity to talk with some of our federal friends about it. So to me, I think that you have to have a good collaborative relationship with other governments, regardless of what your political stripes are. But I don't take it personally that some of them have not been with us. I think that in the end, if we have a Wildrose government, we'll still be able to work very well with our federal counterparts.
Okay, now let's go back to the election, last election. You ran a very good campaign. We all know something happened.
Except for the last 10 days where we kind of blew it.
Well, let's say whatever happened, it happened. But you made big changes after that.
Yes, we did. We had to. I think a lot of people expected that we would do better than we did in the last election. And I was not unhappy with the outcome. Going from 4 MLAs to 17 is still a victory. Becoming official opposition with that number of seats was still a victory. And I think we've learned an awful lot as an opposition. I think that there's been an incredible amount of maturity and growth that I've seen in my MLAs. I think that they know a lot about their areas, and I think that they've appreciated the time in opposition. The party that deserves a term in opposition now is the PCs, because they've not been there for 43 years. And that is part of the problem, I think, in the way they govern, that they don't have to go through the same effort that we do to consult with communities, to make sure that our ideas are in alignment with the communities that we're supposed to serve. And that was part of the reason why we had to make a number of changes. We identified through the last election that there were about 8 or 9 policies that just did not resonate with Albertans. One of them in particular, we had a policy to abolish the Human Rights Commission. We heard loud and clear from various cultural communities that they thought that was a step too far. And so our members passed a policy saying we'd keep the Human Rights Commission, but we'd make it work better. We'd make it operate so that it had more rules of evidence, so that it was a fairer process. And I think that that's a good and reasonable approach. So those are the kinds of things that our members realized from the last election, is that you have a whole series of policies that you take forward, and if some of them simply cannot get public support, then you have to make sure that you're putting forward policies that are in alignment with where you want to go as a party, but also can enjoy that public support. And I think our members did a good job on that.
People say that you are a libertarian, but surrounded by social conservatives. How you feel keep the balance between them and you?
What I would say is, I think increasingly in public life, we're seeing that people of faith have to find a way to express their deeply held beliefs in a way that shows respect for all Albertans. And not everyone can do that. And if you can't do that, you're probably not cut out for public life. We have very high standards of our politicians. We want people who will reflect the best of who we are on the national and international stage. And we don't want to have public representatives who reinforce negative stereotypes about who we are as a province. So I think that level of tolerance for intolerance has changed. We used to, I think, have some candidates who were able to get elected who had some pretty, who said controversial things. I think those days are gone. I think now we have to expect that we as a party need to do a better job of screening our candidates. We as a party need to be very clear about what our expectations are, about how people will conduct themselves in public life when they're representing us as a party. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. We've already started our candidate nominations again, and we've got a much stricter set of guidelines for who can be a candidate for us. And I don't think that we'll disappoint Albertans the same way we did last time.
So if I say Mr. Prentice brought God and dirt, did you see any room that you're leading some support from social conservatives there?
I think that every single political party has people with a broad range of religious values and religious perspectives, and that's as it should be. We want to be able to ensure that the people get elected for us and represent us are reflective of the public at large. I think that the media coverage of some of our candidates in some ways was a little unfair, because we do know that there are individuals in every party that do hold strong religious views. We've learned the lesson that you have to make sure that your candidates can express themselves well. Mr. Dirks is going to have to answer for his own comments and beliefs. Mr. Prentice is going to have to answer for the comments and beliefs of his candidates. But I think the bigger problem with Mr. Dirks is that he's unelected. He doesn't have a mandate, and he's controlling a $5 billion department. And now he'll spend the next 2 months distracted from the business of government trying to win a seat. That to me is the bigger issue that we have with that candidate. But I think that we do have to be able to be open-minded. We want to accept people from all religious backgrounds into government, but we do also want to hold them to a standard that they have to be able to represent themselves well.
So last time, what happened? People voted strategically.
Yes.
You have noticed it that the sum of the Liberals vote, which was standing in, normally it is around 20%.
Yes.
But they end up only getting 10%. So those 10% went to PC party. So are you planning to gain that support back too?
We are hoping people vote strategically next time as well, and they strategically vote out every single PC candidate. It can work both ways. That in the last election there was a call for people of other political parties to support the PCs to stop us. I think people now realize that they were duped, and that whatever was promised to them prior to the election did not materialize after the election. I think there's a lot of people feeling quite embarrassed that they were recruited to keep this party in power when they didn't deserve it. So we've already begun to see that those voters have gone back to their natural homes. If you look at the polls, we've maintained our support from the last election. The NDs have gone up, the Liberals have gone up, and there's a lot of undecided. And I would hope that undecided group wouldn't stampede towards supporting this failed party in the next election. I would hope that they would actually do the exact opposite and look at the riding where the candidate is most likely to win, who is not PC, and that they would vote for them. I think that there is a need really to send the PCs a message that they can't consistently and continuously mismanage our economy, engage in misbehavior and ethical lapses, and fail to be representative of the people and get away with it over and over and over again. At some point, there's a concept in hockey that when you misbehave, you go sit some time in the penalty box. These guys need some time in the penalty box, and it doesn't matter that they've got a new team captain. There is still amends that need to be made for the mistakes that they've made in the past.
It should be a game misconduct, I guess.
It should be I like that. At least a game misconduct.
But anyhow, let's say two big cities, Edmonton and Calgary.
Yes.
Last election, let's go back. Edmonton, you didn't open any account. Calgary, only 2 seats.
Yes.
After the election, you gained a lot of support in Calgary.
Yes.
But what happened to Edmonton? The support went to NDP.
In Edmonton, it's interesting because there are a number of seats where we came in second, albeit a distant second. But Edmonton is really going to decide the next election. I think that what you see in the rural areas is increasingly Wildrose is the choice. In Calgary, it's a split. Some of the seats will go PC and some Wildrose. In Edmonton, it's really anybody's guess. I've seen multiple different polls that have all 4 parties at roughly 1/4 of the vote. So depending on how that splits out, you really could see any political party, any of the main ones that are in the legislature right now, win a significant number of seats in Edmonton. And that's very different than what happened during the last campaign. I think in the last campaign, even though we did have a number of seats where we came in second, I think our overall level of popular support was below 20%. So we have to keep on making sure that we put forward policies that resonate in Edmonton. It's part of the reason why we have taken principled positions in opposing some of the anti-union legislation that the government has come through with. We've taken a principled position opposing some of the changes to the public sector pension plans, which were just frankly unfair. And we have embraced our frontline workers. I have great sympathy for our frontline workers who are demoralized, operating in an environment that's become very politicized, seeing people parachuted in from the political side into the bureaucracy, and not being able to perform in a functional way. These kinds of things need to be addressed. And I think that as our frontline workers have seen that we're their champion and we're their advocate, they're not going to succumb to the fear campaign that the PCs laid on them in the last election.
And most of their leaders actually blame Wildrose. They say, well, we made mistakes, and they always trash on it. But there'll be a time they won't make mistakes, so then what you will do?
Are you talking about the PCs? Will be a time when they don't make mistakes?
They always do.
You have a lot of confidence in them. I have to say, it's been a long time since we've seen capable government. I used to be a PC, and I don't remember looking at every single department and seeing that there were massive problems in each one the way I do today. They have massive problems in finances because they're not telling the true story about our finances. We've got massive problems in healthcare. They can't seem to make it work. Massive problems in the seniors area, people suffering from neglect. Massive problems in the area of dealing with those with developmental disabilities, with up and down decision making on what kind of supports they're going to get. In education, they had to turf the education minister because he had such a corrosive relationship with the teachers and is eroding our standards in education. There really isn't any area where you look at and you say, yeah, these guys are getting it right. So I just don't think that when you have a government that's come in now with a new leader and you're parachuting two people in who know nothing about provincial politics, because they haven't been in provincial politics for a long, long time in the case of Mr. Dirks, or at all in the case of Mr. Mandel. And then you surround them with 15 of the same people who were at the table when Alison Redford was Premier. I don't have a lot of confidence that they're all of a sudden going to become competent and capable. I think that we're going to see a lot of the same kind of misbehavior and mismanagement, and that's what creates an opportunity for other political parties.
You gave them a chance once, because I'm glad you mentioned that once you were PC too.
I was, yeah.
So in 2008, when Premier Entitlement got elected,
yeah.
You were there. I think you supported Ted Morton.
I did.
So what happened at that time? I think people were pushing you to join Wildrose, but then you decided that this party can make some changes within the party. But anyhow, it didn't work out. Yeah. So this time, Mr. Prentice is saying the same thing, that we can make some changes within the party. Is it possible?
I don't think so. I think that the true test is going to be what happens on our finances. Because to me, that is really what people are expecting of their government. That it's not a right-wing or a left-wing issue. It's, can you capably manage the financial wealth of this province? And they have failed time and time again. The fact that we get $9 to $10 billion a year in resource revenue, and they still can't manage to balance the books. The fact that they are spending every dollar of resource revenue that we have, not saving anything for the future. The fact that they're now loading up on future generations $10 to $20 billion worth of debt. The fact that they were siphoning money off the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. The fact that even though they're making all kinds of announcements about infrastructure projects in schools, all we see is signs on properties. We see no actual action on building any of those schools. I don't think that turns around overnight. I think that you've got deep structural problems in the way government operates, that there's a big disconnect between what they promise and what they deliver, and that was really fundamentally the reason why I decided that I needed to join the Wildrose, and unfortunately today, 5 years later, nothing has changed.
So you were right.
So far. I'm not always right about everything. Sometimes I'm wrong, but on this one, I've seen no evidence that we're going to see any real change.
And we're confused on one thing, that Ms. Radford promised 50 schools and renovating 70 schools. Then Mr. Prentice came here, he said, we will build those 50 schools, renovating 70 schools, plus on the top of that, I'm going to build another 50 schools. But anyhow, how many schools we need in Alberta?
We need a lot. We think that we need to not only keep the commitments of the 50 schools that were promised, but we probably do need to build 100 more by 2020. When you think of the number of people who are coming into this province each and every year, and a lot of it is young families, so you're going to consistently see an increase in school-age population. When you think about the fact that we've got 63 school boards, and I can tell you in my area, there are on the 5-year priority list for the public school, there's 4 schools that they need built or modernized. For the Catholic school, it's about the same. And that's just in my area. Can you imagine how that is in Chakde, in Edmonton, and all of the other jurisdictions that are growing? So I think at a minimum, we're going to need to see 150 schools built between now and 2020. It's part of the reason why when we put forward our 10-year debt-free capital plan, we are committed to spending $4 to $5 billion per year on capital, but we would earmark a certain percentage of that for school construction. We firmly believe that we need to make this a priority so that we're able to keep up with the growth pressures and we can make sure that we continue to attract people here from around the world.
We'll have 3 by-elections for sure, but we can have more.
It's increasingly looking like we'll only have the 3. But I guess we still don't know what's going to happen with some of the federal nominations. Mr. Zhao is seeking nomination in Edmonton. Mr. Len Weber is seeking nomination here in Fort Hills. Yeah, if it turns out that either of them are successful, they may end up stepping aside. We also know Kent Hare and Darshan Kang as well as are seeking federal nominations. And I don't know when they're making the decision about when they might retire from politics. So we may have a couple of batches. We may have this first initial batch, and then it may well be that before the next election there's a few others or an early general election. We're preparing for both.
There is some coming that we've got 2 MLAs from Liberal Party.
Yes.
They're running for the, they're already actually nominated, let's say, to run as a
I know for sure Darshan is. I don't know what the plan is
Nobody's running against
on Kent Hare.
I think it will be just a bare formality that to call a nomination. So anyhow, the problem is you got 2 nominated candidates on both ridings. So I think party policy is that your policy is that they should resign it, like those MLAs should resign it, but your nominated candidates are not saying anything. Why is that?
You know, I'm open-minded about it. I can be convinced either way, and I think we'd have to consult with our members on how much they would want us to press for those who were nominated to quit early. Because I have to tell you, we had in the past, Ian Donovan, for instance, was a long-time serving council member on Vulcan County, and he only resigned a seat once the writ dropped. So there is a convention that at the municipal level, we've seen that taking a leave of absence during an election has been acceptable. I don't know that we've ever really had a lot of circumstances where you have a sitting MLA who's waiting for the nomination at the federal level or the election at the federal level. So this is new ground for all of us. But I would say that it is not unusual for someone who's been elected as a municipal candidate or as a school board trustee to continue keeping that job until the writ drops. So we have to consult our members on what they think about sitting candidates holding both those seats. At the moment, we don't have to make that decision because I don't think anybody is in that position. I think people are seeking the nominations, but I don't think anybody's managed to win them just yet.
Okay. Can we expect any floor crossing?
I don't know. I've heard that there is some unhappiness with some of the decisions Mr. Prentice has made. He overlooked some very good people in making his cabinet, in my opinion. I was very surprised to see, for instance, that Greg Wiedek and Richard Starkey were not included. It's really surprising that there are no cabinet ministers south of Edmonton in the rural areas, even though they had candidates in rural Alberta, central, as well as in Red Deer and Lethbridge. So there are some people we understand who are not happy about that. I think it all really depends on what this leader ends up actually committing to and doing. Undoing a couple of really unpopular decisions is one thing. Putting forward positive policy that moves us in the right direction is a whole other challenge altogether, and we just haven't seen any evidence that we're going to see that kind of change. So we're going to keep the door open on those areas where we don't have candidates. Once we've chosen a candidate, I think the door is closed, and I said that before the last election as well. We're working very hard to get half of our candidates in place by the end of the year, and we want to be ready in the event that there is a snap general election called in the spring.
So I think to call a general election, it will be his call. So he will watch his poll, poll numbers.
You know exactly how this is done, exactly.
So I think the idea he gave us that there is a law, that there is a rule that the election should be called on that day, and I'll call it.
Yes.
Why other Wildrose or the other parties want me to call, I'm not going to call it.
It remains to be seen. Again, I mean, we have seen countless progressive conservative politicians say one thing when they're trying to get elected and then do something else when it's politically convenient. And when Ms. Redford wrote this law, she wrote a loophole into it. And the loophole is that they can call an election early at any time. They just can't go any later than May of 2016. So there's wiggle room under the provisions of the legislation. And what we have seen with the PCs in the past is that they do normally, when they choose a new leader, go to an election within 6 months. In the case of Mr. Stelmach, they waited a year, but we think that he may come under pressure to get a broader mandate. And we have to be prepared if he does decide to call a general election early.
So far, you have seen too many leaders coming. I think they changed their leader and came back again, right? So yes. I think you said 3 leaders in 1 year?
This is my 4th premier that I'm up again. I only became the leader in November of 2000, or October of 2009. And at that time, it was Ed Stelmach. So Ed Stelmach, Alison Redford, Dave Hancock, and now Jim Prentice. I'm on my 5th PC premier, or my 4th PC premier, which is pretty amazing to think how much turmoil there has been on that side. And the fact that they have been so embroiled in their internal political machinations and leadership battles is having real consequences. We just found out from our Information and Privacy Commissioner that our privacy legislation is about to be struck down because they couldn't get their act together to revise it in accordance with some of the direction they received from the Supreme Court. So what does that mean? There's 280 open cases of people complaining about their privacy being breached. There are new cases that come forward every day, and now the privacy officer is saying, I might not be able to take them. So there are real impacts when the government can't get its act together, when they're not being competent and capable and minding the store. And sadly, we have just seen too much of that with the PCs. Now we have 2 ministers in healthcare and education for 2 months who aren't going to have their eye on the ball and not going to be managing those departments. They're going to be more interested in getting elected. That's what I worry about. I worry about what kind of mistakes are going to be made because people are more interested in doing what it takes to get elected than in doing what's right for Albertans. And I think that's the problem that we see with the government today.
Are you following the leadership race of NDP?
I would like to follow it more, and I find it unfortunate that we don't hear more about it. I think that's a bit of a disappointment that I've seen is that it seems like the PCs can get people to come out to their press conferences even though they're re-announcing the same old stuff that they've announced before, and yet we don't see very much coverage happening of the NDP leadership race. The NDs are going to matter. In Edmonton, they have the potential to win a much larger number of seats, and they're fierce. Whoever chooses, or whoever ends up winning that leadership race is, I think, going to be a very fierce challenger in the legislature. I know that I always used to shudder a little bit when Brian Mason would stand up because sometimes he would shoot barbs across the aisle and sometimes he'd shoot them my way. But I think that the NDP do have to be looked at as a force, especially once they've renewed with a new leader. What's
happening is Liberal support is falling apart because their main MLAs, actually very strong MLAs like Prentice, Darshan Prand, and even Dr. David Swan is going to retire too, so they're going to lose 3 MLAs.
Yes.
So there was Trent here, Dave Taylor, and even there are a few other Liberal leaders. They were buying to merge NDP with the Liberal Party, and now we can actually hear that both. Do you think there is a chance that both left-wing parties eventually decide to merge with a different name? I ask
my NDP and Liberal friends that a lot, and of course the Alberta Party is a new progressive party as well, so I'm interested in what their plans are also. If you look at our Western Canadian provinces, in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, they've now gone down to essentially a 2-party system where you've got one conservative option and one progressive option. In Alberta, we now have 5 political parties. 4 of them, I would say, are on the progressive side of the spectrum. We're the only conservative party. And what will that mean in future? I think there has to be some kind of realignment for the progressive vote but I don't think it's going to happen until after the next election. But your analysis is correct that that the NDP do seem to be having some momentum, whereas the Liberals are losing some of their key advocates. So that's maybe that's worth you having Dr. Sherman on your show next to talk to him about it.
He's not up to that, and he totally denied it.
Yeah.
But you know what? So many leadership races we have seen it.
Yeah.
So Liberals might have one too.
Yeah. Well, it's getting to a point where it's getting a little late in the electoral cycle to do a change of leadership. Normally, both the PCs and the NDs have done it at the midway point. If there's going to be a change of leadership, it's getting a little bit late to do that. So you'll have to talk to Dr. Sherman about what his plans are to try to win a few more seats.
Well, Danielle, time doesn't allow us to talk anymore. But anyhow, at the end, what message you want to give it to our listeners?
Well, I would say that we have a pretty exciting choice out for us in the coming by-elections and then in the general election. What I would say is now is a time to send the PCs a message that all of the misbehavior and mismanagement of the last number of years, it deserves some time in the penalty box, and they're not going to be rewarded for it. We're going to be putting forward solid candidates in the election, and we encourage you to look at our campaign platform. It's at www.wildrose.ca. And if you want to help out one of our candidates, the best way to do so is to go to that website. But we are looking forward to a really robust discussion of ideas, and hopefully we'll be able to send a few more Wildrose representatives to the legislature after those by-elections are over.
Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਦੇ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਕਿ ਅਲਬਰਟਾ ਦੇ ਨਵੇਂ ਬਣੇ ਪ੍ਰੀਮੀਅਰ ਜਿਮ ਪ੍ਰੈਂਟਿਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ ਵਾਅਦੇ ਪੂਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਮੰਡਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਜੇ ਵੀ ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਰੱਖੇ ਹੋਏ ਹਨ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦੋ ਨਵੇਂ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ ਹਨ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਚੋਣ ਤੋਂ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਬਣੇ ਹੋਏ ਹਨ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਅਲਬਰਟਾ ਦੀਆਂ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਲੜਨੀਆਂ ਪੈਣਗੀਆਂ। ਮਿਸ ਸਮਿਥ ਦੇ ਅਨੁਸਾਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਫੈਸਲਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਅਲਬਰਟਾ ਦਾ ਆਮ ਨਾਗਰਿਕ ਨਾਰਾਜ਼ ਹੈ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੁਤਾਬਿਕ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੀਸੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਹਾਰ ਦਾ ਮੂੰਹ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਪਵੇਗਾ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਵਾਈਲਡਰੋਜ਼ ਸੱਤਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਵੇਗੀ। ਮੈਂ ਉਮੀਦ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਪਸੰਦ ਆਇਆ ਹੋਵੇਗਾ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਫੋਨ ਤੇ ਈਮੇਲ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫੇਸਬੁੱਕ ਤੇ ਟਵਿੱਟਰ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਜੁਆਇਨ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਚੈਨਲ ਨੂੰ YouTube ਤੇ ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਹੁਣ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ। ਧੰਨਵਾਦ।